My next guest is John Hanna, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy and a former national security advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Welcome, Mr. Hanna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to ask you about the situation in both Egypt and Syria, and I wanted to start with Syria, where violence is escalating. We closed our embassy in Damascus on Monday. Our diplomats are pulling out. Did we wait too long to do this, Mr. Hanna?
Yeah, my sense is that the administration, in a very fluid and complex situation, has unfortunately been kind of a day late and a dollar short for most of the past 10 months here. It was late calling to get rid of Assad. I think it was late saying military pressure and effective support to the internal opposition. So I think, again, it's a very, very difficult situation. This isn't as simple as Libya was. But even taking that into context, I think there is room for criticism here of the administration.
Okay. Now, Secretary of State Clinton has said Assad must go, so the administration is stepping up the rhetoric. Our allies, however, seem to be taking, and the U.S. seem to be taking military actions off the table, stressing economic sanctions. Is that the right way to go?
No, quite the contrary. I think that the notion that we've got any kind of peaceful solution on the table here is a fantasy at this point in time. This situation is getting much worse. We've clearly entered a phase in which it's going to become much more militarized, in which the opposition, which was originally peaceful, has kind of given up on the international community. They've heard that message that there is not going to be any outside military help a la Libya, and they've decided to pick up weapons themselves, and they have enough access to weapons that my guess is the internal situation becomes much worse over the course of the next several weeks. And the only question is, are we going to be in there supporting that internal opposition, supporting the people against this murderous anti-American regime, or whether we're going to leave that to various Muslim Brotherhood, Salafist, Saudi-backed organizations across the Middle East.
Okay, now Russia and China vetoed a UN resolution that was aimed at stopping the killing, and Russia seems to have not given up on diplomacy yet. Their foreign minister was headed to Syria today for talks. I believe the foreign minister, yes, was headed to Syria today for talks. What is Russia's calculation here? The rest of the West is coming down on them pretty hard. Do they simply not care?
I think they care more, apparently, about sticking it in the eyes of the Americans and showing that they're prepared to stand up to the Americans and try and salvage what they can out of this last remaining foothold that they have to being any claim of a great power in the Middle East, which is this decades-long relationship with the Assad mafia. Of course, on the other side of this is, of course, the Russians themselves. Putin knows that setting any kind of precedence, whether it's in a place like Libya, a place like Syria, looking inside a regime at its authoritarian nature, if in fact there is an uprising, and we've seen signs of some of that in Russia, that the population is getting very unquiet. I think for states like Russia and China, makes them all very uncomfortable setting that kind of precedent.
So Putin is running for president. Does this help him politically, taking on the big bad U.S.?
I suppose it certainly helps him with some part of his constituency to get them riled up and mobilized. My own sense is that the idea of standing up to the Americans and demonstrating some aspects of Russian power and Russian influence across the world, the ability to make things happen or to stop things from happening that the United States wants to occur, that still plays pretty well against a fairly significant plurality of the Russian population, unfortunately.
Okay, now what can the U.S. do going forward? Where is our leverage? I mean, Clinton ignored the UN in the 1990s when Russia tried to stop us from intervening in Kosovo. What about that option?
At the moment, I don't see it. It could be that we're being moved in that direction ultimately, that the amount of savagery and massacres that we see on the ground eventually does become completely intolerable, and there's a demand for a U.S.-led intervention. My guess is that the president and the administration, as well as some of our allies, particularly in an election year, are going to do everything they possibly can to avoid going down that road and opening that Pandora's box in Syria. On the other hand, we do have an increasingly credible military force on the ground, supported by the vast majority of Syrians, that is trying to defend itself, is determined to attack and bring down this regime. And it seems to me that the least we can do, as President Reagan did in the 1980s under the Reagan Doctrine, is help people that are seeking to free themselves from vicious anti-American dictatorships, to provide them means of communication, to provide them money so they can undertake strike funds and purchase weapons, work with our allies to provide some levels of training and armed support. We need to help these people bring down this regime if we're not prepared to do anything militarily ourselves. It's in our interest, and it's the right thing to do.
Okay, let's turn quickly to Egypt. We just have about a minute or so left. 43 people, including 19 Americans, are being charged with illegally influencing Egyptian elections, among other things. What's going on here? And is it appropriate to liken this to the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979, as some people are doing?
Hey, I'm not sure I have the answer. I'm not sure anybody has the answer about how we've gotten into such an awful position now in Egypt. The fault lies primarily with the Egyptian military that allowed that initial raid on these American NGOs to occur at the end of December. It's only escalated and gotten worse despite interventions from the United States trying to solve this quietly. It is now just at the moment, a no-win situation that looks like it's moving towards disaster. Is this like the Iranian hostage crisis? I'm not sure I want to go there, at least not yet. I'm not sure that that's fair to President Obama. This really is a situation almost entirely of the Egyptian military's making, a demonstration of its own incompetence, its own stupidity, its own desperation to hold on to power inside of Egypt against a rising tide of Islamism and these protesters in the street.
Okay.
Paying attention to the bad foreign interference of the West, and the United States is always a winner inside of these Arab society. So
well, let me ask you.
We're in a terrible dilemma here, because the only thing we've got now that stands between us and a total Islamist takeover in Egypt is this relationship we have with a very, very imperfect partner in the Egyptian military. We don't want to sacrifice that entirely.
One last quick question. The political right was somewhat divided over ousting Mubarak. Some argued that what replaced him could be worse. Are those skeptics justified in their concern, given what's happened with these hostages?
Certainly, I think this does introduce caution into the idea that we want to get rid of the anti-American or the pro-American dictators, that simply getting rid of them is a solution to all of our problems. I think that's not right. On the other hand, I'm not sure there was anything we could have done late in the day to save Mubarak. What the real lesson is here is that we need to be working with these pro-American authoritarian dictators to try and nudge them and move them along toward evolutionary, gradual political and economic reform. And we didn't do that with Egypt, and that's a tragedy.